Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we are back in War Thunder and we're going to be talking about a tank which I'm very much surprised was not in game on the French release. Now I understand a lot of you want reviews of some of the new vehicles, but unfortunately with the challenges that have been set ahead, it isn't always as easy to spade out new vehicles when you have to do these challenges, and it already takes you, 2 to 3 hours a day doing it, which is normally the time I use to spade new vehicles for doing reviews. So unfortunately stuff like that is on the back burner, at least for the next few days, while I'm doing those challenges. So I thought today I'll talk about a topic which I should have done a few weeks ago, but it seems like right now, since there's a lull in what I want to do because of the challenges that are in the game right now, why not bring it up? So there is a tank which is subtly missed in the French tree, and I would say it would be a rank 4 vehicle. We have the AMX-13s, and the pinnacle of them, in my opinion, is the AMX-1390. The reason for this is that the 90mm on the AMX-13 chassis is a very potent and powerful gun, and as a lot of the AMX-13s feel, sometimes they feel very much undergunned at their BR, and that's pretty much because they have the speed, they have the scouting mechanics to try and make up for that. But with the AMX-1390, the 90mm fits very well where it is at the tech tree. And I suppose you could make an argument for the first AMX-13 as well being in a good position with its FL-11 turret. But anyway, there is another tank which is just not there in the tech tree, and it is definitely a hybrid between a light and medium, and the reason why I personally believe it should be put into the game, or should have been there on launch, is because it really is the true vision of what the French were trying to create. They were trying to create a 30-ton medium tank with an auto-loading system on it, and it was supposed to be fast, it was supposed to have enough armor on it, but it wasn't the main concern. It was supposed to have a gun which could slap anything that it would fight about, and it had to be eventually nippy. Now this came eventually in the form of the AMX-30, which we do have in game in 2 variants, but before that, in a certain set of prototypes, in the mid-1950s, because you've got to remember the AMX-30s are pretty much 1960s vehicles. In the 1950s, the French were able to create what was seen as the perfect classification of the doctrine that they were aiming for. The AMX-50s were too heavy. The Lorraine 40T, still too heavy. They wanted to hit that 30-ton mark. AMX-13s, they wanted them to be around 13 to 15 tons. The reason for this is because they were supposed to be the lights. But for the medium side, they wanted this 30-ton vehicle, which could do everything. So what was created? Well, it's the Bat-Chat. Now you may have heard a lot about the Bat-Chat, mainly through World of Tanks, because it was an absolute terror in that game, and I don't know if it still is. But watching some of the older replays, if you watch YouTubers such as Circon or Quickie Baby, you will see Bat-Chats just running around like headless chickens, annihilating whole enemy teams. And the reason for that was because they were quick, they had auto-loaders, and also they were able to pretty much one-clip an enemy and then get the hell out of there. So really good and experienced players would be able to pick positions where they knew once an enemy tank fired, they could get around the corner, clip them, and then run away again. It was the perfect, maneuverable, versatile tank for the, quick and reaction-heavy player. And that's generally, when you look at that skill set, is one of the most fun to watch. That is why a lot of people are having fun in stuff like the Lorraine 40T right now, and also some of the AMX-13s, because that style of gameplay, when you can actually pull it off, is one of the most fun, interesting, and best to watch in any game which is based around tanks. Now, the full name of the Bat-Chat, because obviously the Bat-Chat is its nickname, is the Batignolles-Chatillon Char 25T. So this was the closest they got to a 30-ton tank, which isn't the AMX-30, which came in, I would say, about 10 years after this machine. So the Batignolles-Chatillon was the 25-ton version of what they were looking for. It was twice as much as the AMX-13, but it also featured the 90mm f3 cannon, which is very similar to the one that you have on the AMX-1390. They weren't exactly sure if it was a light or medium tank, but it seems like the official records call it a medium tank because it's, twice as heavy as any lights that they had, and it was operated by 4 crew members and was able to go 65 kilometers an hour. So we're talking about an incredibly quick medium tank here, which is up-armored compared to the AMX-13. And obviously its nickname being the Bat-Chat because it's a lot easier to use. It was a one-off experiment of the Batignolles-Chatillon Corporation, or the guys who came together to create it, to try and form exactly what the French doctrine asked for, which was the 30-ton, super quick, maneuverable, heavy gun vehicle. Instead of stuff like the AMX-50 and the Lorraine 40T, they aimed for that 30-ton and they pretty much nearly hit it. So the fact that it was a one-off experiment, and because it wasn't a heavy like the AMX-50 and it wasn't a true medium like an AMX-30, and it wasn't as good, or it got stuck in two minds. So it wasn't a heavy, so it wouldn't be able to fill the heavy roles. They didn't see it as a proper medium tank because it was built more like a light tank. But the light tank they already had was much more lighter and more nimble than the Bat-Chat, so it never really fit into the role that they wanted it to, even though this is the perfect tank they asked for at the start when they started doing these types of vehicles in the late 1940s. But what happened was, by the time they got stuff like the AMX-30 and the AMX-50 series and were working towards the AMX-30, this kind of became redundant. Very, very odd circumstance. It does show how plans do change over time. Now, the closest vehicle it is to is probably the AMX-13, just because of its shape, its look, and the fact that it had very similar speeds, but not as nimble as the AMX-13. What is kind of interesting is some of the technology that was used in the Bat-Chat was reused in the early versions of the AMX-30. So stuff like the transmission and the propulsion system were used in the AMX-30, which were from the Bat-Chat. So even though this was seen as a failed experiment, just like all experiments, there are glebes of information that you can take out of them. Now, the design of the Batignolles-Chatillon 25T, it had some very similar looks to the AMX-13. I think it's probably the best way to say it. It obviously had the French oscillating turret to it, and instead of the 75mm, it wanted to use a 90mm, which would be similar to the one used on the ARL-44 at the time. So that's what they were aiming at. Also, in addition to this, it had a 7.5mm coaxial machine gun, which is very, which is very common on pretty much all of the tanks that we have in game, and also the ones that we have in real life. So, let's talk about the oscillating turret. So I've gone through it a few times about how it works and the general reason why oscillating turrets were seen as good for the French and why they went for them, but I'll just summarize it here, quickly, just so it's easier if people haven't seen those other videos. So, the main reason for this two-part oscillating turret, the lower part of it would give you the traverse of the turret, and then the upper part would give you the elevation. So therefore, the entire turret is pretty much it's what would be the word? So the entire turret, instead of moving freely with its mantlets through a turret opening, it was only the upper part which actually moved. So when you look at a vehicle in game with an oscillating turret, you'll see that it has kind of like a flat bit at the bottom of the turret, and then it has the top of the turret, which is much more curved and angled. Now that bottom part doesn't move up and down, it doesn't help with the elevation. That bottom part, all it's designed to do is rotate in a horizontal fashion, and then the top part is supposed to go upwards and go downwards. That's pretty much how the oscillating turret works. The reason why this was mainly used is because you could mount bigger guns on it, compared to weight ratio. So that's why you ended up with stuff like the AMX-1390 and the Char 25T. And also, it meant that you could also get into positions where your turret was a lot flatter than a lot of the contemporaries at the time, so being able to hide behind stuff like, let's say, a building or rocks or anything like that, you wouldn't have to expose as much of your turret as you would compared to something like a Russian tank or something like an American tank. Also, with the addition of the oscillating turret, you also got the auto loader mechanism, so the loader-free carousel system. And on top of that, because of the loader-free carousel system, you had the external reload. So you may have watched some videos, even mine, that have talked about stuff like the AMX 13SS11, where in order to reload the loading mechanism, you would actually have to open up the doors at the back of it and pretty much load it in that way, instead of just doing it internally in the turret itself, just because the turret was too small. That's why a lot of them hunted in pairs, the AMX-13s, because one would reload while the other one covered it, very much similar to how it would work in fours in the British Army in the World War II. On top of this, there was obviously some limitations to the oscillating turret. The lack of NBC protection was a large issue, and also shot traps, which soon appeared on the turret itself. You may have actually found them in game so far. In game, they're not as realistic as you may see in real life, but pretty much the bottom of the turret itself becomes a huge shot trap because it isn't angled at all. So once you hit it, it pretty much would blow off the turret. The issue with this is that in game, because of the way that the mechanics of shells work, sometimes the turret ring itself just eats a whole shot. So therefore, you can't really get anything done with that. There's also the cupola and the where the machine gun port is, and the fact that it wasn't a full-on angled surface, there was bumps in it where stuff like optics were. That pretty much created a lot of shot traps on the vehicle itself. So only in the 1950s, the AMX-13 was the only machine which really had some success with the oscillating turret. Now you've got to remember the AMX-50s and the Lorraine 40T, which was a prototype as well, and the AMX, the other AMX-50s that we have in game, and all of these, they weren't successful at all in what they were trying to, sort out, which is why they went back to a normal turret structure with the AMX-30. So the hull itself actually differentiates from what you'd find on a classic AMX-13. What you get is a slope front glacis of 50mm of armored plates, and then it was down to 30, and then 25mm on the sides, and 20mm on the rear. The driver sat on the left-hand side with 3 periscopes and a sliding hatch, which he could close obviously in combat, and then that guy was followed by the middle fighting compartment and also the rear engine compartment. In addition to the driver, the radio operator sat in the same compartment, so in the lower part, the hull of the vehicle, and the gunner and commander took place in the turret itself. The commander's cupola was on the left-hand side, and it was dotted with 6 vision blocks, and the gunner's hatch on the right was circled by an extra machine gun ramp. And this tank was very fast, pretty much down to the fact it was lightweight. It also had a compact hull design, and even though it had all of these, one of the big advantages it had over something like an AMX-13 is it actually had comfortable armor on it, which meant that you actually had the ability to get shot and maybe not die, where in the AMX-13 this was just not the case. If you got hit, well, you're getting the hell out of there, or getting the hell out of that tank incredibly quickly. The engines that it either used a Hispano-Suiza V12 HS110, or more probably, if it actually went into service, the SOFAM 3M 27.101, which had 500 horsepower behind it. The power was passed on to the large tracks that it had on the side of the machine, and pretty much similar to how you'd see in a Panther, if you've ever looked into how those machines run. It had 6 doubled road wheels, 3 return rollers, and then of course the front drive sprockets and the rear idlers, plus the hydraulic suspension system, which is very important on incredibly quick tanks, which are very compact. You don't want your guys vibrating to death. And then it also had a radio on board, the SCR528F radio. Now, what actually happened to the Batchat series of vehicles is there were 2 prototypes which were made and tested at Batignolles-Chatillon in Nantes, and there was also tests in Brittany, in northwest France. If you've never been to Brittany, by the way, I really recommend it. It's a lovely place. A lot of people talk about just Normandy and all that, but in Brittany there's places like Brest, there's places like Chatillon, which are wonderful historic towns, and if you ever want to do like a road trip or something, it's a perfect place for it. I used to go there a lot when I was younger, and we used to go on the beaches, you know, bodyboard, surfboard, all of that stuff. It was lovely, absolutely wonderful there. Highly recommend. But anyway, these tests took place in 1954, and even though the tests themselves were successful, this didn't lead to any productions of the actual vehicle. Some of the technologies, as I talked about before, were reused in the AMX-30 and other AFVs, and some variants were also developed on paper, but then were never produced or saw service. Today we're just talking about the ones which were built and tested. And also they did have some issues with them, but then again, it seems like all of these French tanks had some issues, but these were just never ironed out. So it had unreliable hydraulic suspensions. I'm sure this could be fixed quite easily. Constant maintenance of the chassis. The AMX-13s had this issue as well, and also oscillating turret issues, such as an absence of the NBC and also an external reload. So pretty much all things that the AMX-13 suffered with, but because this was a prototype, these were reasons used to say that it would never go into production. Now, maybe this never went into production because the AMX-30 was around the corner. Maybe it never went into production for many reasons. As talked about before, maybe they didn't see it as something which had a defined role in the game, where the role itself would be of a medium tank, but also they already had the Lorraine 40T that they could take from, or the AMX-30 if they felt like it. So, unfortunately, this machine never made it to production, but the reason why I would put it in the game with the current state of War Thunder, even if I may agree or disagree with how vehicles are added to the game, we have stuff like the Lorraine 40T, and we have the Lorraine Tank Destroyer. These both are prototypes. Why not add in the Batignolles-Chatillon Char 25T? It seems like a perfect fit to put in rank 4. It is basically an up-armored AMX 1390, and since the AMX 1390 is having some great reports, why not put this in? And also just give it the ARL 44 gun, so it doesn't have to have an autoloader. If that is the issue that a lot of people are talking about, where they are worried because this machine will have an autoloader or wreck face like the rest of them are, then just give it the ARL 44's gun, and then you can drop it to like 6.0 and just make it a slightly up-armored AMX-13. For me personally, I think that would be a fun little idea, and it's kind of just sad not seeing the Bat Chats in game. It is one of those weird vehicles that, especially because of World of Tanks, people just know about, and to not see it in game, it's very similar to other prototypes. Like if something like the Panther 2 wasn't in game, even though it was never really tested and, you know, got off the ground, this was actually tested and didn't get off the ground. Maybe a better idea would be something like the Pershing. It would be as if the Pershing wasn't in game or something like that. So maybe the T-25 would be a better example. But anyway, we're going to get back to reviews soon. I apologize for the wait, because obviously update 1.75 has been out for a while, but there's not really a lot I can do when I'm doing these challenges all the time. And I understand that yes, I could just buy them, or yes, maybe I could ask for them through the content creator thing, but I don't want to. I want to know what it feels like to get these vehicles, and from that point I can understand, is it worth grinding out these vehicles, or is it worth doing these types of challenges next time? And every time I do them, it feels like the next time it gets worse and worse in my head to whether I want to do them or not. So maybe next time I'll just give them a miss, we'll have to see. But anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.